that wise use of our collective resources will help the nation, will help our economy and help our society, and I'm looking forward to being a part of that.
So you might be seeing an influx of Aussie tourists over there this year, so
well,
you think you can cope with that?
Absolutely. As an Australian, I welcome the compatriots to come over.
The interesting thing is our investors that came in on the seed round are all back in and doubling down on their initial investments. So we've met all the milestones that were set by the board investors, met the budget. Amazingly, we stayed on budget. I don't know how. And we've got really good traction.
Kia ora and welcome to The Weekly Wrap, where we go over the top video stories from the past week. First up, it's been promoted by iwi leaders as a framework to help Māori weather the current political and economic storm. But there are still plenty of questions over te whare o te rangatiratanga. I sat down with Ngāti Toa Rangatira CEO Helmut Modlik to discuss the collective way to address issues with government policy. Last week, Māori leaders gathered at Ōmahu Marae near Hastings to discuss the idea of establishing te whare o te rangatiratanga, a proposed assembly that would represent all Māori, hapu, whānau, urban Māori and iwi. The hui was hosted by Ngāti Kahungunu and was the latest in a series of discussions that began in January last year, focusing on how Māori can respond collectively to challenges posed by the current coalition government, including the Treaty Principles Bill and MACA amendments. Among the participants was Helmut Modlik, CEO of Te Runanga o Toa Rangatira. He joins me now. Tēnā koe. Helmut, why the need for this whare or assembly?
Well, 2024, as everybody knows, was a year of extraordinary disruption to the trajectory of, I'll characterise it as truth and reconciliation, the journey of truth and reconciliation that our nation has been on for some 40 or 50 years of just progressively coming to grips with our colonial and post-colonial past, the implications of that past, and trying to figure out together how to live in a contemporary setting in a constructive way. And with the arrival of the coalition a little over a year ago, there was I'll say a callous reversal. Certainly there was enough mean-spirited initiatives implemented by the coalition that really disrupted fundamentally both the substance and spirit of that truth and reconciliation journey. And so, of course, everybody is well aware what played out, and this is part of the consequences of that changed dynamic.
Yeah, now out of that came this spirit of kotahitanga, which we've heard a lot about in the last 12 months. Was that part of this idea of the assembly or the whare?
Yeah, absolutely. The first unifying call went out from the Kingitanga at the beginning of 24, well publicised, large group of Māori people attended at Tūranga Waiwai. And there was a inspired and inspiring set of messages given there that were fundamentally about encouraging us to not despair, to strengthen the degree of unified response and action, and to go forward with a wairua or spirit of rangi Māori or peacefulness that characterised really what happened over the rest of the year. So that's where it began.
Did you yourself, I know I did, felt this uplift of Māori, particularly with our rangatahi, the pride by the end of the year was incredible. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, it was an interesting phenomenon to observe over the course of the year, the emergence of publicly anyway, or increasingly publicly available images and sounds of our young people who are in that 20 to 40-year-old group who have both sufficient life experience, education, and grasp of their cultural roots and the quality of them as people, their leadership, what they had to say was a wonderful a wonderful outcome of the disruptive activity of the year was to see these young people emerge and begin to take their place as emergent leaders, both now and for the future. It was a very positive development.
Let's go back to Omahu Marae in Hastings last week. I was there. Clearly some pushback from Hapu, or the grassroots, if you like. As much as anything else, I thought it was an indication of just the speed of developments last year. They felt like they'd been left behind a bit.
Yeah, look, that's fair in terms of the dynamic that was on display there was certainly some really forthright conversations. I'm not sure that last year's speed of activity was concerning. I think my read is that the concern was the go forward, that if there is going to be anything new that is created to represent all of Māoridom, the speed of that was my interpretation of their concern, is what they wanted to make sure that the voices on the ground weren't lost in the speed of the creation of a new whare to represent everybody. That would be my read of it.
Yeah, as someone who I guess has grown up as urban Māori, what you define as urban Māori, I do have ties to my marae, Putahi, near Wairoa, and I am part of an iwi and a hapu, but I really got the sense that day of what that means, and it's pretty strong, isn't it? But you still have to be able to look after urban Māori as well.
Yeah, look, the reality of our people in 2025 now is the diversity of circumstance, how people are identifying as Māori. I mean, that's a consistent dimension of it. But what's really important and what gets lost often in the rhetoric in engagement with the likes of David Seymour is the characterization of our identity as being racially based. And see, what you're describing there, Mike, is actually that our identity in the case of the treaty bill, the treaty itself, isn't actually about race per se. I mean, it's no more about race than it is that the signatories on the British side were Anglo-Saxon. Okay, kia ora for that. That wasn't really the issue, and it isn't the issue today. It is who we belong to. And in 1840, who we belonged to were hapu, and in 2025, who we feel we belong to as counterparties to the treaty is, yes, hapu, but it's also iwi. And now, interestingly, our people increasingly also identify with urban collectives. So figuring that out is something that belongs to our people to have those discussions. But you're dead right that what emerged at Omahu was a very strong sense of local identity and a desire to ensure that local voices weren't lost in the creation of a national forum for representation. That was crystal clear.
One of the things that was mentioned a lot, Helmut, was economic tino rangatiratanga. What does that mean for you and for Ngāti Toa?
I mean, all of us are just trying to live our lives as we see fit. And, that is determined significantly by our capability, our resources available to us, and the opportunities that exist. And that resource one is critical, obviously, creates choices, gives us choices. And for the Māori community during the colonial, early post-colonial period, we were largely dispossessed of our economic base, constrained to live originally in rural and then relatively impoverished urban environments. So, yeah, poverty or lack of resource has been a barrier to the Māori community being able to pursue its aspirations individually and collectively. Post-settlement, and also in the contemporary era, as we've increasingly become more educated, more integrated into the wider economy, and our individual and collective resources have grown, then the opportunity for us to leverage those resources to increase the trajectory of growth, of opportunity, and the way that those resources can be deployed to bless the lives of our people and our nation. That's now on a slope or trajectory of growth that is unprecedented. And so one of the potential outcomes of establishing a new collective forum for collective action is that we can draw on those collective resources in ways that just haven't been realistic or available to us in the past. And I've got no doubt that wise use of our collective resources will help the nation, will help our economy and help our society. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that. Ngāti Toa has been on that journey for the last 5 years in particular. We settled 10 years ago. In the last 5 years, we've gone from total assets of just over 200 million to now over $1 billion in 4.5 years. And while that may not quite be the trajectory of the wider Māori community, it's just an example of what's potentially possible when you get people focused on the right outcomes.
Yeah, karawe, fantastic. I spoke with the kai whakahaere of Ngāi Tahu, Justin Tipa, a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about iwi ki te iwi, or iwi to iwi, as being the next big step for the Māori economy, given that they have been standing shoulder to shoulder for all of 2024. Now they're looking at each other and going, okay, I've got this amount, you've got that amount, let's do something together.
Yeah, look, that's an exciting. We already had some of the early green shoots, shall we say, of that potential. But it is fair to say over the last 18 months or so, some concrete conversations have been had about some exciting opportunities. I mean, I will mention one. So it's no surprise that I'm a big fan of the value to our tribes as well as to our nation of infrastructure investment. So I'm all in, Ngāti Toa's all in on investing in infrastructure, both in its ownership, its delivery, its maintenance, design, the whole thing. And so that's a conversation I've been trying to have with other iwi over the last 18 months. And got a good hearing, including from Justin and Ngāi Tahu. And so we look forward to pursuing that as a strategic asset class, investable activity with our iwi partners, but the wider community. And there will be others where the strategic value of cooperating will be self-evident. And as I say, great example and looking forward to it.
Well, MB's Te Ohanga Māori Economy Report is due out, I think, in about a month's time. But they did show some snapshots or some highlights from it, which show the growth in Māori asset base from 69 billion in 2018 to 119 billion in 2023. So that's really underscoring the significant shift, if you like, beyond traditional sectors like agriculture and forestry into real estate, property services, professional services. Once that report comes out, do you think it's going to show a lot of what's been happening within the Māori economy?
Yeah, that's exactly what it'll do. And the thing that I hope it surfaces, and if not, I'll flag it here. One of the differentiators for investable activity in the Māori community is, returns on investment is always an issue. But the first question, and I'll speak directly for Ngāti Toa, but the first question that's always asked is, what's the strategic alignment? And because we're a community of people with a development imperative, our first and foremost that's in our mind is, what can we deploy our capital that will make a difference, right? And so what makes a difference for our community, for the community we're a part of, and for our nation, that's where we want to put our money. And we want to do it in a way with people using technology and so forth that's sustainable and earns returns. Now, by definition, if you're putting your capital into what actually makes a difference, there must be a demand for it. And of course, that's the first question. Where is there sustainable demand that you can tap into, which can generate, again, by definition, a growth response? And I think that's a key that is lost sometimes in our mainstream investable activity. People are I'm overstating a little bit, but are looking for returns per se. And the frame that our Māori and iwi investors bring to it is, as I've outlined, is more about what is the strategic alignment and return to our community, and then the returns follow that. It reminds me of the kōrero that the All Blacks say, worry about your job, doing your job well, and the wins come. It reminds me of that.
Mihi ana ki a koe e rangatira. Thank you so much for your time today, Howard.
Kia ora, Mike.
In this week's Underarm column, co-editor Hamish McNichol and Australia correspondent Lachlan Colquhoun take a look at the falling Aussie dollar and what this could mean for the Australian economy going forward into the new year.
With the New Zealand dollar trading at 2-year lows this week, it could be some solace for Kiwis to know that we are not alone. Across the Tasman, the Aussie dollar is also in the doldrums and is testing 5-year lows after falling around 10% since September. NBR Sydney correspondent Lachlan Colquhoun is looking at the strange case of the Aussie dollar in his first Underarm column for this year. So, Lachlan, 10% is a big fall in 4 months. Why is that?
Well, there are two words for that, Simon, Trump and China. And in many ways, it's kind of based on things which haven't really happened yet. With Trump, there's an assumption that he's going to be inflationary, and that's going to mean fewer interest rates. And with all the global turmoil that's around, the US dollar is strangely both a safe haven and seen as a growth asset. So that's appreciating the US dollar. A lot of currencies like the Aussie and the Kiwi are coming off second best there. So, but Australia's also down on the trade weighted index, which is a basket of a lot of currencies. And the reason for that is largely seen as the slowdown in China. The Australian dollar is often seen as just a proxy for China. And iron ore prices, for example, a big proxy for that. Prices are falling through the US $100 a tonne barrier. And so Australia exports $110 billion worth of iron ore each year to China. So that's, with the Chinese economy slowing down, less demand for iron ore, the Aussie dollar under pressure as well. So it's also the prospect of the Trump tariffs on China. We don't know what they're going to be yet. Will they be 60%, or is that just a bluff and a negotiating position? But so on all of those on both of those two factors, really, China and Trump, the Aussie is under pressure.
Right, okay. But so how is this going to impact on inflation and also the possibility of further rate cuts?
Well, so Australian inflation has been coming down to a point where rate cuts are considered possible in the first part of this year, but a lower dollar is actually inflationary. So imports, for example, comprise 15% of our CPI. All of our petrol, like yours, is imported. I think I saw a headline that you guys are suffering at the pump at the moment as a result of your lower dollar. We are as well. Yeah. So the RBA is expected to cut rates. Some say it could even be as early as February, others April or May. Will the impact of the lower dollar on inflation make them reconsider? I mean, in Australia, the economy is absolutely screaming for rate cuts. We've got low growth. The housing market has hit the wall, peaked. So the possibility that if the dollar falls, will have an impact on inflation, then cuts might be delayed, or we might not get as many interest rate cuts as we had hoped for. Okay,
let's look at the other side of the ledger, other potential impacts, and they're not all negative, really.
No, not at all. I mean, in the investment banking community, they're hoping that a lower dollar will mean more M&A activity on our markets, and we're seeing that already. I mean, there's a $2.9 billion takeover battle for Insignia, which is a ASX-listed financial services company that kicked off last week with two PE companies fighting over that. So there's a hope for more M&A action on the ASX. Foreign investors will probably pile back into Australian property market with the prices lower. That's at all levels, commercial real estate and individual offshore investors. Obviously, exports are going to be cheaper, so that's going to be good for some exporting industries, service industries, for example, and it's good news for the domestic tourism industry. Then it might encourage more overseas students. In fact, I've got an anecdote on that. We had some American friends who popped in for some coffee last week, and they were taking an Uber from my house in inner Sydney to Wollongong down on the south coast, which is about 85 and 90 kilometres. So I thought I would never personally consider taking an Uber down the south coast to Wollongong. No. So I checked on my Uber app, 150 Australian dollars it would have cost me to get to Wollongong by Uber, and they said, "Oh no, that's nothing. It's only 90 US dollars. That's nothing. We can afford that." So wow. So that's an example of how it's affecting it, and we're seeing a lot of American tourists in town right now.
Coming down for some nice cheap Aussie dollars. All right. What about the rest of 2025? What is the market outlook like?
Well, a lot of the pundits at the moment saying the Aussie could go below US 60 cents. And if that's the case, then the RBA will probably start paying real attention to the impact that that's going to have. So certainly people planning overseas holidays are starting to pay some attention. I saw a list of top travel destinations for Australians in one of the newspapers yesterday. There are only 3 where the Australian dollar had actually appreciated in the last year. Turkey was one of them. Japan was the other. And you might be surprised to know that New Zealand was the other one, Simon. Our dollar is actually up 2.8% against the Kiwi.
So nice cheap New Zealand dollars.
That's it. So you might be seeing an influx of Aussie tourists over there this year. So
well,
you think you can cope with that?
Absolutely. As an Australian, I welcome the compatriots to come over. Hey, Lachlan, thank you so much for your time.
Cheers, Simon.
Finally this week, Auckland medtech startup Kitia Health has begun implanting its monitoring device for managing chronic health conditions into children as part of a Phase 1 clinical trial. Senior journalist Fiona Rotherham with more on this world-first milestone.
Kitia Health is developing the world's smallest and most accurate implantable sensor for hydrocephalus and heart failure. Joining me now to discuss the company's progress is co-founder and CEO Simon Malpas. Welcome, Simon.
Kia ora.
So can we start with what the technology actually does?
So technology specifically enables pressure to be monitored inside the body. While we can monitor blood pressure with an arm cuff, when we go in other areas of the body, we have to be inside the body. So we've developed an implantable sensor that measures pressure. And that is the important thing is, what do you do with that? It's used to help people monitor their chronic health conditions. So, and they can do that at home, which is the big, massive opportunity.
So you've started with hydrocephalus patients, but it's wider than that?
Well, pressure can be measured around the body, and any clinical indication where pressure is altered, to high blood pressure, heart failure, a number of bladder disorders, etc. And within the brain, hydrocephalus is one in which pressure should be monitored, but currently hasn't been able to be in the home environment.
So in a world first last year, you successfully implanted a chip under a patient's skull to do the monitoring. Where are you at? What progress have you made since then?
Yeah, so in 2024, we passed probably what any medtech company would say is our big milestone, which was implantation or treatment of the first patients in Auckland City Hospital. So that approval, the ethics to do that, all the background work was completed previously, and now that a number of people have been at home and monitored continuously their brain pressure, as an early warning detection system about when their health condition may be deteriorating, when they should go to hospital. The symptoms for failure or problem with the condition is a headache. We all get headaches. So how do you discern whether it's a headache that really is life-threatening for one you should just take a Panadol for? So that's what we offer. Where we're at is we have finished the adult portion of the trial.
So that's 10 patients?
Well, we're still carrying on with some of the adults, but we're now embarking on children. So children for hydrocephalus is one of the really big unmet clinical needs. These poor patients have the most serious life experiences with the disease because they are repeatedly in hospital as their shunts fail or they have suspected shunt failure. So poor parents are endlessly taking their children back to hospital to say, does it need to have more surgery, more brain surgery? And no one wants that. And most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's a false alarm. So what we offer is surety and data, and that's really where we're a digital health company, because we move on from the device to being, you now have information that a person can act on.
So you do 10 adult patients, 10 children. What happens then?
What happens after that? Yeah, so that is effectively the Phase 1, the safety trial. We get snippets of what we call benefit efficacy as well. But the next phase after that is to apply to the FDA to do a very large-scale pivotal trial in the US and New Zealand continuing, in which we will study 100 to 150 patients and demonstrate the benefit of the technology over and above the existing standard. And after that, it's regulatory. We should be able to get regulatory approval.
What's the kind of timelines around that?
So the trial, the FDA or US trial will probably take about 2 years. We expect to start that at the end of 2025 earliest. So roughly 2 years from that, and then on to regulatory approval after that. It's a long journey.
What's the hardest challenge you faced so far as a spin-out?
Surprisingly, the hardest challenge hasn't been the technology. We've really invested over the last 7 years. We're a university spin-out, invested in technology development, and that has gone exceptionally well. All credit to the team that has driven that. The biggest challenge for us is around capital raising and actually getting investors excited about medical technologies, understanding that it's not necessarily risky from a financial perspective, but it's a really good investment. And often, we're not perhaps the most sexiest of sectors to be in, medtech, when other things a flavour of the month. That has been challenging. And trying to get international investors aware about the opportunities with New Zealand companies in the medtech space.
So you raised $6 million in 2023 and you launched this $10 million snowball effect funding round. What do you plan to do with that money if you're successful?
Yeah, so really that is around finishing off the current trial, the safety trial, and getting our application to the FDA for and getting approval to do the larger scale trial in the US. So it's really geared around that.
Last year there's talk about you raising $20 million. So have you actually dropped the amount?
Yeah.
And why?
It's the same thing as getting traction with investors to get that sizable check that needs to come from a lead investor is hard. And the environment is hard. Everyone says the environment is hard, not just the cafes on the street, but it is hard to raise capital. And also getting them to understand, because we're not at revenue. So we are pre-revenue. We are one of those other relatively unique companies in that sort of setting.
Do you think there'd be more success once the initial trial's completed and you've hit that milestone?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly had our current the interesting thing is our investors that came in on the seed round are all back in and doubling down on their initial investments. So they have we've met all the milestones that were set by the board investors. Met the budget. Amazingly, we stayed on budget. I don't know how. And we've got really good traction with clinical teams and things. So we have done everything we said we were going to do. It's actually, I think, the risk profile around or the attractiveness of medtech is just tough.
And what about international investors? Do you think they're more likely to come in once you're doing US trial?
Yeah.
Which is ironic because you need the money before them to do the trial.
I know, yeah. It's a chicken and egg. Yes is the answer. We'd love to have strategic investors come in, and some of them express interest in the next round that will happen after when we get approval for the larger trial. So you need to be a little bit more in market in terms of the trial side. So that's the hope and expectation.
Okay. How much government support has the spin-out had?
So direct in the company, yes, we've had a lot of really good support from Callaghan. We're recipients of an Arahia Trailblazer grant.
So that's $2 million, is it?
$2 million, yes, and that's been totally inceptual. That is absolutely pivotal in extending our capital and the innovation program that we had. Couldn't have done it without that.
Is it enough though? And do you think there is enough support for startups?
Is it enough for us? A greedy person will say you always do more. You're always raising, you always could do with more capital. New Zealand companies, I will always say, are undercapitalised, and that is very true with us. And that adds risk. But we do our best. We run on an oily rag. In general, we need more support. I think Callaghan would probably say for every one application they fund, there's another 5 or 6 that should have been funded. So it is we underfund, and we underfund our investment in New Zealand R&D. We always have. I use the phrase, I might have said it to you previously, that for 25 years I've heard various ministers say we're going to increase our investment in R&D above 2%. Not one has made a dent in that number. It has stayed flat or even gone down.
And obviously the science funding cuts aren't going to help that either.
No, the cuts are really sad, but also the lack of direction as well, and policy there's a total vacuum in that space. But we, standing back from it, we need to have a conversation about what sort of economy we want to have in terms of innovation. Innovation requires investment. We can't rely on venture capital solely providing all the investment in that. It has to be through universities, tertiary, all the various, and assisting those startup companies. And
obviously there's reviews due out early next year sometime, around February, we understand. In terms of, this is not your first company, your first rodeo with a startup. How's it different this time around for you then?
Scale. We're bigger. Only about 7% of medical devices that go to market in the world are implantable devices, so we're one of those. New Zealand's first implantable device. We're also, in a regulatory sense, the higher end of the scale about review. So it's a whole other level of challenge. But I think all the previous companies and work that I've done sort of sets you up. You don't sort of start off, I'm building on building blocks, and the team's been really awesome. So building the team around that is part of the fundamental part. What
lessons have you taken though from your first experience into the second one? Anything in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. Focus. Do one thing, have confidence to do one thing, and do it really laser focus, and try and pull the team onto that focus. I often say that as a CEO, I only have really maybe 4 things: strategy, culture, and execution, and then capital raising. And if you don't have culture and strategy around focus, you can't execute. So I think one of the things I've learned, I think in the way long ago previous company, that we were a bit all, I was often a bit all over the place. We could try that. That looks cool. Oh, we could try that. And you don't get traction. You don't get anywhere. Now, we started many, many years ago with very much a laser focus, and that's been our one golden nugget. Keep doing that. Keep focused.
Thanks again for joining us. Our news team is back from 5 a.m. tomorrow with the latest business news you can use on mbr.co.nz. Ka kite.